Hello, and welcome once again to another episode of Inside the World of Max Headroom. Yes, today on the Headroom, we're going to talk about McKulty Manor. I did a tape the other day about many of the deceptive practices that I saw being used in McKamey's Manor. And I started thinking more and more about the whole subject of this haunted house epidemic. That's the big word outside of narcissism. That's the big word in America, epidemic. But this epidemic of these haunted house things, and again, as in my last tape, I mentioned that it's just been plastered all over YouTube and other forms of media. There's a movie on Netflix that has Russ featured, and et cetera, et cetera. But what really motivated me to make the second tape, and it's going to be the last one, and this is the reason why. I'm getting concerned that all of this haunted house stuff is beginning to, like fan Russ's fire. And if you watch, his videos are getting more sophisticated. He's getting national attention. I don't know what it's doing to shut down the manor, but I don't want to make much more tapes out of it, because I think the more that we feed into Russ's madness, the more that this destructive cult, flourishes. So I thought, first of all, I might take a second and try to define a couple things, which you probably heard on other stuff. And bear with me, because I'm going to be switching, since I'm a baby boomer and not a millennial. I'm going to be switching back and forth between paper and cell phones and shit like that, because I don't know how to do much on a computer. So anyway, I thought I'd start out by just trying to explain what a cult is. And then I'd like to describe what a destructive cult is. And then I'd like to try to put into that rubric where these haunted house experiences fall, and where McKulty Manor falls. Okay, actually, McKulty Destructive Manor. Little foreshadowing. So this is just a very simple definition of a cult that I just pulled out of Wikipedia, and it said that a cult is a group of people or a set of beliefs. And I'm just going to edit here, like a set of beliefs, like it's fun to be scared, or there's something cool or challenging about being scared, that is set up in opposition to a center of established authority. The word cult originally meant a system of ritualistic practices, sometimes associated with the Latin word cultus, meaning worship. Okay, that's a cult. Let me also just read for a second to you, if I can get this to work, what the definition of a destructive cult is, because I think it's very different. Oh, I did that pretty quick. Okay, a destructive cult is a cult or other movement which has caused harm to its members or other people, or which will be likely to do so. There is a discussion of what harm really means in this context. For most researchers, it includes physical harm, so organizations who injure or kill their members qualify. Some researchers also include mental abuse in this notion of harm. For example, a destructive cult is a pyramid-shaped authoritarian regime with a person or a group of people that have dictatorial control. Yep, old Rusty boy. It uses deception in recruiting new members. Let's see, what else does it say here? Oh, and then it also makes some references to looking up either Rick Ross, who's one of my really all-time favorite guys, who's been studying cults forever, and I've been following this guy since the internet first got started, and he has three qualifications that he considers a destructive cult, and his work is based on Robert Lipton's work, which I think has something to do called oh gosh, I can't think of it. Oh, thought reform, which he considered a form of destructive cults. So with those definitions in mind, um, I think maybe we could talk a little bit about the movement itself, the haunted house movement. It is a bit of a cult. If we look again at the definition, it's a group of people or a set of beliefs. And in my case, there's obviously a group of people because there's a bunch of contestants, okay? And there's a set of beliefs. And one of the beliefs that I believe is a little redundant is operating here is that, it's fun or growthful or a challenge or something. There's a belief involved in the process of being frightened half to death. Um, and also, in this whole movement, there are beginning to be several centers of established authority. Because one of the things I became aware of in watching Surviving Life, who's doing a great job of covering this whole McKamey Manor thing. This is no shit talk about Ron Swanson. But one of the things I was beginning to notice was that, like, all these people who've been through McKamey's Manor are now starting their own manors and saying theirs is better or less destructive or whatever. But nonetheless, I think it all falls into a kind of like anti-establishment group of people who are practicing some shared form of beliefs that are outside of the mainstream. And that doesn't mean that a cult is bad. I mean, you could consider a lot of things cults. You could consider the internet a cult. Because everybody has this shared. You can consider WikiLeaks a cult. I mean, and I don't consider those destructive things. So I'm not saying that the cult of the haunted house experience is necessarily a destructive cult, but it is a cult nonetheless. However, if you start to look at old McCulty's Manor, you can start to see that a lot of the things that he does falls into the description of a destructive cult. It's a movement which has caused harm to its members or other people, which is likely to do so. It falls into the rubric of creating some kind of physical harm. It also involves mental abuse. And it also has, authoritarian control by a dictator, namely Russ McCulty. So, I think there's enough evidence there to try to say that the McKamey Manor is a destructive cult because it has a following. There's all these people that are coming out and talking about what a horrible experience it's been. But, it's still, can you imagine all the people that are still trying to get in? I mean, I don't know if this is a really good analogy, but like, if you look at like some of the videotapes of some of these ethnogenic means to spirituality, like ayahuasca and 5-MeO-DMT and stuff like that. Boy, I watch those videotapes, it scares the shit out of me. Sometimes I think I've never fucking do anything that crazy. But it definitely falls out of the mainstream. You don't see people at an IBM lunch all taking a hit of DMT together and going back to work, spiritual beings. So I think that watching these kind of cult-like activities can grow and grow and grow. But let's first go back to the idea of the cult, the haunted house phenomenon being a cult in and of itself, and people. There's a lot of reasons that this cult could be in existence. You know, as I mentioned in one of my other tapes, I mean, horror and gore and all this has been, you know, a manifestation of human interest, I believe, because we're all of the mammalian species and are attracted to, you know, that kind of thing in general at some deep primal level. I also mentioned this notion of when I did my tape on horror and snuff about how, you know, people are attracted to going where no man has ever gone before. And I think there's elements, you know, of that in all of these uh, horror experiences, whatever you want to call them. Commercial horror experiences. I think that's a good way to call it. But you know, a friend of mine who is the guy I made reference to in the other tape, who is the past covert operative for the DOD, who was experienced with interrogation stuff. He loves horror, okay? And, you know, he made a point, he watched my tape, and he said, you know, I really liked your tape, but she says, you know, there's one thing that you really left out. And I said, what's that? And he says, well, it's the adrenaline rush of being scared. And he started going on and on and on. And he's also fought in battle, okay? So he's ducked bullets and stuff like that. And you know, he's told me like adrenaline gets really addicting, and that may be, you know, that the human organism has found, you know, through its primal impulses and stuff that I've already mentioned, has found a way to stimulate adrenaline control, to feel some kind of buzz, you know, through the experience of fear. And I thought that was a really good point, you know, because all those people, you know, afterwards they don't look so bad to me. It's only afterwards when they've had a chance to decompress that they start maybe complaining. But I do believe that you know, they're buzzing. They're buzzing big time. Whether they're saying stop, 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 they are on a adrenaline buzz. And so, you know, it makes sense, I guess, just like roller coasters and stuff like that. It's the same thing. And I think there's a cult of people who are into amusement parks as well. But cults don't have to always be bad. However, as I just mentioned in the Russ McKamey, I mean, excuse me, in the Wikipedia definition of a destructive cult, that he's doing all the things that would be considered a destructive cult, and hence be put in more into the category of, like, I hate to say it, but like a Jonestown, you know, or what's it, Marshall Applegate's thing about the UFOs and the suicide things. Now, I know nobody's jumping off buildings that have gone through McKamey Manor, but I did see an interview with a young lady who was terribly traumatized by the experience. And I just thought that I wanted to add a couple things also that I find Russ McKamey's McCulty Manor being a destructive cult outside of the realm of academia, okay? And that speaks to what goes on Russ's part. Remember, I said that a destructive cult has an authoritarian leader who the members obey pretty unquestionably. Well, as I mentioned in my other tape before, he uses a lot of stage hypnosis that's of an indirect fashion. You know, he does a lot of things that are have been, you know, typified by the work of Milton Erickson, MD, who was a guy who was a hypnotist who kind of learned how to use hypnotic principles without inducing a formal trance. And that has to do with the confusion technique and all the stuff I mentioned in my other tape. And if you don't know what that is, I suggest watching my other tape and I can get some more views. But nonetheless, you know, the fact that Russ is an authoritarian leader and taking advantage of a group of people who have kind of an outside of the mainstream interest, and uses hypnotic induction and also a hell of a lot of trickery. You know, I mentioned in the tape that my friend who worked for the DOD, you know, had explained to me that what Russ is doing as waterboarding is not waterboarding. It is not. And I explained in the tape before why it's not, and I don't think I need to go into it. But it's not waterboarding. It's making someone who's hypnotized and is knowing that that may be coming think he's being waterboarded. But in the technical sense of the term waterboarding, it's not how it happens. First of all, you know, my buddy, I was talking to him on the phone the other day, and he was explaining to me exactly how you do a waterboarding. And one of the things you do is you tip somebody on an angle with their head down, okay? Now, when you see Russ McKamey doing waterboarding, it's always in a bath. It's usually, when I've seen it, it's in a bathtub. The person's actually sitting up, You know, so he's not leaning back where his nasal passages are open to, you know, taking water in. And it just looks like he's waterboarding, okay? If you want to disagree with me, that's okay. But, you know, also another thing that I forgot to mention on the last tape that would indicate that he is trying to just scare the fuck out of people in a destructive manner is the duct tape he uses. And I forgot to mention that. And somebody brought it up in the comment section, say, because I asked the question, why doesn't somebody just smack them? And this guy said to me, well, you know, their hands are taped. And I remembered that while I was watching the tape, if you notice him pulling on the, you'll hear him say, let's tape her eyes up. And then he grabs a roll of tape and he yanks it, and you hear that sound, you know, so, oh man, this is like really duct tape. But then he wraps it around the person's head, right? Well, now ask yourself the question. Everybody on that show gets tape wrapped around their face somehow, right? But yet only certain people get their hair cut off, okay? Now, what does that tell you? If you had duct tape wrapped around, real duct tape wrapped around your face and your hair, everybody would need a haircut to get the fucking shit off, okay? But if you ever notice, when you see Russ McKamey's tape, it sounds like he's ripping off the real McCoy right off one of those rolls. But yet, when he wraps it, you'll notice, especially when he submerges somebody in water or starts splashing water in someone's face, you know, or even, you know, like he'll just grab the piece of duct tape and just pull it, and the whole thing just drops down. One time I saw a tail hanging after somebody had been in water. Duct tape doesn't loosen like that. It's pretty waterproof. You know, it's not going to just start dangling. It's stage tape. Okay, so what he's doing is he's using, like, you know, bullshit manipulation to control in an authoritarian manner and scare the fuck out of somebody who is already believing that something's going to happen that may only resemble what he's been told is going to happen. You follow? Another thing he does too, I think, that all destructive cults do, is they control the person's food intake. And if I've seen several where they say that they don't want you, you know, don't eat before you come to McKamey's Manor, you know, and it's probably, you know, they kind of frame it like, oh, you may be puking so much that, you know, we don't want you to puke too much. But in reality, I think what they're doing is, you know, you can't, your mind won't function as well, which will make you more amenable to hypnosis and more amenable to suggestion if your body isn't, you know, nutritionalized the way it should be. So there's another thing he does. And also, he gets the people to do these crazy exercises, which means he wears them out. Now, let me make an analogy for a second, okay? I'm sure most of you that are watching this show has been watching the anti-Scientology stuff. And I'm an ardent anti-Scientologist, so don't nobody come trolling me. I'll kick your ass, okay? But nonetheless, somehow I'll kick your ass, okay? I'm not saying physical. But like, if you start to make analogies, the contract, you know, the you know, McKamey 40-page contract, which I really believe is the beginning of the hypnotic process, because he starts to tell you what you're probably going to experience while you're repeating it over and over again, lowering your brainwave frequencies to a theta level and being more suggestible. So you're already anticipating this to happen, and you're going to do your best to accept it, okay, and be compliant. But you see, the contract, that you read it, is very much like Scientology's Sea Org billion-year contract. It's like a ritual. It's a formality. And, you know, it's something that kind of artificially binds you to thought reform. And, you know, you have to go through some thought reform to put yourself through that bullshit at McKulty Manor. So I don't know how much more, you know, wise things I have to say, but I do want to just try to make a differentiation and also an appeal. And that is to all the people that are part of the scare the shit out of yourself cult, which I bear you no malice. I like roller coasters and shit like that. I like firearms, you know. Oh man, I one time had a 454 Casull, which is like the most powerful handgun in the world. I got the biggest kick out of scaring the shit out of myself, blasting myself away every time I shot it and scaring the fuck out of everybody in the shooting range. I mean, so I know what it's like to crave an adrenaline rush. And I'm not trying to knock anybody if you are attracted to these, the haunted house epidemic or whatever you want to call it, haunted house cult. Because you are in a minority. You're not the majority. Not everybody's running to haunted houses, but that's okay. I'm all tattooed. I'm in the minority too. I'm not criticizing anybody for that, but I do want to appeal to the notion that those of you who have gone through the haunt and have started your own haunt, I want to appeal to you to keep it clean. You're all touting that you're keeping it clean, but I heard one guy, and I won't mention his name, but I heard him bragging about how he scared the shit out of a girl because he had talked her into the fact that he thought he was going to light her on fire. And then he had the audacity to say, what's eating a worm? I mean, I'd even eat a worm, but I don't think the fucker ever did. Okay? So, what am I trying to say? I'm just hoping that we can keep the haunted house phenomena as a regular old-fashioned cult, a collection of people that share a collective belief, that are in the minority, going a little bit against the establishment, and nobody gets hurt. But Russ, you have a destructive cult going on, and I see you very akin to the behavior of David Miscavige, who, for those of you who don't know, is the self-appointed leader of the Church of Scientology, which is under so much scrutiny in the United States right now for being a cult as well, a destructive cult, excuse me. So I hope I've made myself clear. Russ is in a destructive cult, or he is a destructive cult. He's an authoritarian leader. He has an unquestioning following of people. And thank God for guys like Ron Swanson, actually, and also like what's it called, the Me Too movement, because people are speaking out when they feel they've been abused, where previously they wouldn't, and they start identifying with the aggressor and then getting more into a group like this. And I'm so glad for all of you that have stood up and realized what crazy mishigas this really is, because it's a combination of taking advantage of you, tricking you, covertly hypnotizing you, and getting you to do things that could be harmful to yourself, as many of you have realized afterwards. But please, if you're still into the general cult of the commercial haunted house phenomenon, then, please, guys, keep it clean. Don't use Russ as a way to say you're better, but still be pretty similar. Be sure nobody's getting hurt. Be sure you're not hypnotizing somebody without their knowing it. If you're going to really try to scare the crap out of somebody, put in the warning that they may be subjected to having their eyes taped with stage tape, or they may be exposed to simulated waterboarding. I could understand that a lot better. So that's all I got to say. So with that, I'm going to conclude with my new sign-off sound. And I hope that this has been informative. I've tried to keep it quick. I hope it wasn't superficial. And this has been another episode of Inside the World of Max Headroom. Thank you very much.